What do all these scores say about you and your performance?
Well, here we are today on the day of the greatest, second greatest in my opinion, game on the planet. First one being the Tour de France. Whether you're a Chiefs fan or an Eagles fan, your team will win today. Because nobody's coming out of this game in a draw. And so, decided to, on basically the eve of, or not the eve, sorry, the anniversary of my first FTP with a smart trainer, to do another FTP test. My first one I did was a ramp test a year ago, almost to date. And so I wanted to see how much this improved. My original FTP, when I first got a smart trainer, was about 170. And then immediately went up to about 240 or so. Oh my gosh. When I did the grade for the first time, and has jumped up to 259 over the course of last year. And so part of what this was meant to do is not only see if I can get a PR up the grade, but also see where my FTP fitness is at. And I will talk about more of that in the editing room, because I feel like there's a lot of different numbers we pay attention to, but which one should we really be looking at in terms of our overall, not only health, but performance? So I'm gonna stop talking, keep pedaling, and see how I do today up the grade.
All right, let's talk about performance. What do you look for when it comes to determining how well you're performing? Is it your Zwift racing score? Is it your virtual ELO or Velo, as I call it, from the Zwift racing app website? Do you look at your 5 and 10 and 20-minute power in Zwift Power? Are you looking at how well you're placing in different races if you ride races, or if you're doing group rides or robo pacer rides? Are you looking at how easy, your TSS, as Trainer Road puts it, or your what's the other one? Your perceived exertion. What do you look for when it comes to performance? I personally like to look at a multitude of different things, and I feel like, and the reason why I wanted to make this video is I feel like I've developed an unhealthy habit of checking all these things and then using that to determine whether or not I'm a good or bad cyclist. And I put it that way because I know, mentally that is how it can come across. Like, oh, I didn't win this race, I did bad. Or I, placed second in, if you look at my most recent race, the Shimano Find Your Fast,
All right.
I, could have gotten first place, but I ended up in second. I got beat at the line, at the last second. And, I look at that and think, is that who I am as a cyclist? Is that, what, the stories that are going to be told about me in the cycling space? Are they going to say, hey, he's the guy that, always ends up mid pack, or always ends up, you know, kind of quitting on the line? But when it comes to all these numbers, I would say that you really need to look and define what those numbers mean. And what I mean by that is each each number has a purpose. When it comes to your racing performance, Zwift racing score, and the virtual ELO, the velo, really don't paint a picture of who you are as a cyclist, but rather they paint a picture of what the outcome of that race was on that day. And so some days you perform better than others. Some days you feel better than others. I've done now, two FRR races where it's, 10 days back to back of racing, and I make it 10 days because usually we do get a rest day in there, but I don't rest when I rest. I still throw in, some good work or another race. And so when it comes to your racecraft, when it comes to race strategy, your Zwift racing score or your velo is going to tell you how you compare against other racers in that same race. Doesn't mean that's who you are overall. That just means when it comes to strategy, when it comes to your racecraft, this is where you stand. Now, I personally think there's a big fudge factor in both of those numbers. While Zwift Racing Score really only focuses on outcome, so where you place in the race in comparison to others. And I know there's supposed to be some numbers, kind of, or some math in there that determine, if you beat someone who's better than you or has a higher racing score than you. See, there I go again, letting that better or worse slip in. So if you let someone with a higher racing score beat you versus you beating someone with a higher racing score or someone beating you with a lower racing score, then that's supposed to alter how many points you get. I can tell you that placing 12th two times, almost back to back, only improved my score a couple points versus placing second improved my score by like 16 points, something drastic. I know podium also gives you bonus points. And so while that may paint a picture of what the outcome of that specific race was, that doesn't mean that I did poorly in the race in comparison to others. That may mean that I had a better race strategy. I drafted better. I took turns better. Now that I have steering, I can cut into turns versus, letting my avatar sit out in the wind on, turns or end up going from front to back because my avatar didn't, ended up being pushed into the outside of the turn instead of the inside. And so, racecraft is going to be a big determining factor into how your Zwift racing score turns out. When it comes to the virtual ELO, so ELO is actually a scoring program that came from chess, and I'll let others talk about it. I know there's other videos out there about it. Specifically, Zwifty Chat has a podcast with the developer of the Zwift Racing app, ZwiftRacing.app website. So I would highly recommend check it out. I'll link it above. And so that takes into account not only where you end up in the race, but also your performance in the race. And I think the biggest number, and again, I would defer you to that podcast to really get in depth on, what it's how it's calculated. But one of the biggest numbers that you end up seeing in your page is your effort. And while I feel like that number doesn't paint the right picture of who you are as a cyclist. So paying attention to the velo score, and while that may and truly mine has looked at probably the best predictor of the outcome of a race in comparison to others. And so I really do believe that that's a good looking at, where my velo score is in comparison to others. gives me a good, good high percentage of where I would end up in that stage. But because your score ends up fluctuating frequently because of the efforts that you put into the stage, and was your 1 minute power better today than yesterday, or was it worse today than yesterday, and those kind of things, your velo score fluctuates a lot, and that can feel like, oh, I'm doing bad. That can send you down a mental spiral of, oh, I'm doing bad and I'm feeling bad, which means I'm bad. And no, that's not at all what that means. That means your racecraft changed today than it was yesterday. Maybe you are a little bit more sore. Maybe you are, a little bit more tired. Maybe you're getting sick and you just don't know it. Maybe you're, still recovering from being sick and you thought you would perform better than you did. Maybe you took a vacation and had 5 days off and your legs just aren't, Zwift ready yet, as it were. I find that if I'm not, if my legs aren't like at or below 90%, I don't race well. If I'm at 100% where I've taken a bunch of days off, my legs feel good, there's zero soreness, I don't race well because that first hit of tension from racing just completely throws off my abilities. And so, what else should we be looking at? Well, if you're not looking at your ZRS and you're not looking at your velo for your personal performance and how you're progressing, then let's look at your power. FTP is widely used in all different manner of sports in the esports when it comes to cycling. So why not look at your FTP? Well, your FTP is a snapshot of your overall performance in a given window. Now, Zwift primarily uses, from my understanding, Zwift primarily uses the 20-minute power to gauge your FTP. So what your 20-minute power is should be relative to what your FTP looks like. And while that may be, for some people, that's going to be lower than, or maybe higher than what your 1 hour power is. I know that is a common way of looking at FTP is what you should be able to hold for 1 hour. I can tell you from me personally, that was not true until recently. I, literally up until not too long ago, couldn't ever hold my FTP for an hour. And then I did an Alp to Zwift attempt that took me a little over 60 minutes, and I held my FTP for the entire duration. I was at my FTP or above for the entire duration, but my average power through the effort was my FTP. And so that, you know, that was the first time I got excited about the FTP because I was like, man, I actually hit it. I actually hit the myth of 1 hour power with my FTP. But again, does that mean your FTP is a good measure of your performance improvement? I don't think so. I don't think I think it's stronger than your Zwift racing score or your Velo, but I don't think it's going to, really determine what you're capable of. I am I'm technically classified as a sprinter when it comes to my racing performance. And so my FTP score, whenever I do workouts in Zwift, because I don't use Trainer Road or any other training app, my workouts, the quote unquote punchy sprinter workouts, are easy. 400 watts at 30 seconds. That's nothing to me. I have my 15-second powers, right around 11, just under 1100 watts. My 30-second powers, just above 900, I think like 950, somewhere around there. So I've got a pretty strong sprint. 400 watts for 30 seconds is nothing. That's barely going to raise my heart rate. Even if I do it repeatedly, for an hour, that's barely going to raise my heart rate. And so that, you know, FTP is going to guide other numbers that may not truly define who you are as a cyclist or who you are as an athlete. And so the thing that I look for, and the thing that I would encourage you to look for, is where's your heart rate at? Now, in the beginning, you saw my, original FTP attempt, which was the actual Zwift FTP workout versus I thought it was RAM test. I know I did a RAM test at one point back then. I just don't have the video of it. But that initial video was the power that I could put out when I first got a trainer, and that's all I could muster was, my FTP was at 198. I could, I was watching in the video, my heart rate in the, mid to low 200s was in the 170s. As soon as I got into the mid to upper 200s, it, jumped into the 180s. And that was the best I could muster at the time. Now I'm climbing up, the grade, which is Zwift's new um, FTP test, and I'm holding anywhere between upper 200s to lower 300s, sometimes mid 300s, and my heart rate is, barely in the 180s. It's still high up, and it's still, I'm at the top end of my capabilities, but I'm also putting out more wattage than I would previously. And that's really a big thing that I look for is what what's my heart doing and what zone am I in terms of power? When I'm doing zone 2, am I able to do a higher power of zone 2 and keep my heart rate low? When I'm sprinting, am I able to hit higher watts, hold it for longer, and keep my heart rate, from maxing out? And so I think looking at your numbers that way will really give you a good picture of who you are as an athlete, who you are as a cyclist, versus looking at all these other numbers that are different algorithms, different calculations that really don't take into account your racecraft. They don't take into account maybe, you're having a good day, having a bad day. They don't take into account your overall, um, health and well-being, your nutrition strategy. Like there's so many different things that could affect your performance that day that ultimately don't account for who you are as an athlete, who you are as a cyclist. And so what do you do with that information? Now that you have it, what do you do with it? And like I mentioned before, Zwift Racing Score and the Velo, great for looking at competition. Where am I going to place? I've got, a handful of guys that are stronger than me that have a, higher 20-minute power, higher 10-minute power, you know, maybe, they got same 1 or 5 minute power, but their Zwift Racing Score is lower than mine. Maybe they're brand new. Maybe they're, an athlete that rides outdoors mostly and doesn't race often in Zwift. And so that kind of, looking at their Zwift Racing Score is only going to really tell you, hey, maybe you'll perform better than them, but maybe you won't. You got to take into account all the different factors. Looking at, I know a lot of people will look at Zwift power right before they race, and they'll kind of gauge out like, oh, this guy's got a strong 20-minute power. They've got a, you know, or their 20-minute power is not as strong as mine. That kind of deal. I think depending on the race, 20-minute power may not even factor. The flattest fast, 20-minute power had nothing to do with it. Your 15-second power, your 30-second power made all the difference in the race. Yeah, you did have to hold a higher wattage in the peloton in order to stay with the group, in order to make it, especially if, some of the races that I did, because I think I did 4 of them total. I, a couple of the races, I had to hold basically my FTP all the way up till the end and then launch my sprint, which is, a big factor. But my 20-minute power is my FTP. So that should be expected.
Yes.
That I should be able to do that, you know. And while someone may have a higher 20-minute power, that doesn't mean that that's that's the effort they're going to put out in the race. Most people want to stay in the draft. Most people don't want to work up front and push the pace. Only the stronger riders that are completely out capable of winning the race, the ones that are just, should be in a higher category but aren't, are the ones that are okay with pushing the higher power because they're going to create their own breakaway and they're going to do their thing. And so if you take a look at all those numbers and kind of put them together, you get a rough estimate, 60, 70% outcome. Hey, maybe this is what'll happen statistically. But at the end of the day,
Oh my God.
the overall result in a race is going to be determined by your racecraft, not just your scores. So I'll wrap this up by saying, depending on your overall goals, if you're looking to just race better, then use the
Oh my God.
Zwift Racing Score Velo, 20-minute power from, Zwift Power, all that stuff. But if you're looking to improve your performance overall, make sure you're also looking at and really guiding based off of your experiences. How's my heart rate doing?
Oh my
How's
God.
my breathing doing? How are my efforts doing? Do I feel better than I did last week? Do I feel stronger than I did last week? Am I getting new PRs? Am I, and that's a big factor for me is, am
I
I sprinting stronger? Am I climbing faster?
don't know if I
Not just
PR'd.
because of equipment, but because of effort. So hope that helps,
I would imagine
and
I
I will
did.
catch you guys on the next one.
That's what I wanted to see today. It's a near flat bar. And not bad. Almost 20 minutes. The 16 minutes, just under 300 watts. What was my 5-minute today? Ooh, my 5-minute went up. 5 and 10-minute definitely went up. Does it show? I don't think it shows. That's fine. Yeah! That's what I wanted. Guys, Miguel from that thing you just watched. If you know where that reference is from, please leave it down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, watch videos, playlists, whichever pop up. But thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I hope to see you next time.